Good evening. Vice President Sara Duterte has resigned as Department of Education Secretary. According to Duterte, she resigned from her post as Secretary of the Department of Education not because of her weakness, but due to her true compassion for teachers and students.
Mga kababayan, ang aking pagbibitiw ay hindi lulan ng kahinaan, kundi dala ng tunay na malasakit para sa ating mga guro at kabataang Pilipino. Bagamat hindi ako magpapatuloy na mamamahala sa kagawaran, patuloy pa rin nating itataguyod ang kalidad ng edukasyon na nararapat para sa Pilipino.
Apart from this, Duterte provided no other reason for her resignation. Duterte also resigned from her position as the Vice Chair of the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict. Meanwhile, according to the palace, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has accepted the Vice President's resignation as Education Secretary and member of the Cabinet. Duterte's resignation will be effective on July 19, 2024. INQUIRER.net has already asked the DepEd on who will replace Duterte as its chief, but it has yet to respond. Duterte has been noticeably absent from the events of President Marcos in the past weeks, failing to attend his departure ceremonies to Singapore and Brunei. Her resignation comes following weeks of being unresponsive to media queries on several issues, including China's increased aggression in the West Philippine Sea and controversies surrounding Philippine offshore gaming operators. Senate President Francis Escudero says Vice President Sara Duterte's resignation as education chief was inevitable given her family's feud with President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. and her silence on several issues. According to Escudero, Duterte's resignation is inevitable from the time her father, former President Rodrigo Duterte, and her siblings started attacking President Marcos and members of the First Family. Escudero also points out the policy issues in which the Vice President has not stated her support, including the West Philippine Sea, the Bagong Pilipinas hymn, and the cases against a known Duterte ally and wanted sex offender Apollo Kibuloy. Senate Minority Leader Aquilino Coco Pimentel III stresses the need for Duterte's replacement as Secretary of the Department of Education to be someone who has worked with or in the DepEd for decades. Meanwhile, ACT Teachers Party List Representative Franz Castro says Duterte's decision to resign as Education Secretary has been long overdue, as nothing was done to resolve the education crisis in her 2 years at the helm. The lawmaker hopes that Duterte's resignation will allow President Marcos to appoint a DepEd chief who will serve the education sector properly. Duterte resigned as the DepEd chief and vice chair of the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict. Her resignation will be effective on July 19, 2024. Philippine Navy personnel assigned in the West Philippine Sea resupply mission on June 17 figured in a fight with bolo-wielding China Coast Guard using their bare hands, according to the Armed Forces of the Philippines. According to the AFP Chief General Romeo Bronner Jr., the Philippine Navy personnel pushed the rigid hull inflatable boats of the Chinese Coast Guard using their bare hands just to prevent the Chinese Coast Guard from hitting them. Meanwhile, AFP Western Command Chief Rear Admiral Alfonso Torres says that the China Coast Guard personnel also punctured the Filipinos' rigid hull inflatable boats using their bolos. Torres also discloses that 7 firearms were seized by China Coast Guard, but they were inside gun cases and were not used during the resupply mission. Bronner clarifies that despite having guns, the Philippine Navy personnel did not use weapons to avoid starting a war. According to the AFP, a sailor lost his thumb, while a number of naval personnel also sustained minor injuries during the June 17 mission in the West Philippine Sea. The China Coast Guard rammed, towed, and even boarded Philippine ships, only deeming it as control measures in line with its claim of sovereignty in almost the entire South China Sea, including most of the West Philippine Sea. The claim comes despite a 2016 International Tribunal ruling effectively dismissing its claims stemming from a case filed by Manila in 2013. The Department of Foreign Affairs is denouncing the recent illegal and aggressive actions of Chinese Coast Guards in Ayungin Shoal in the West Philippine Sea, which resulted in injuries among Filipino naval personnel. The DFA is referring to a ramming incident on June 17 between China Coast Guard vessels and Filipino boats during a resupply mission to BRP Sierra Madre. The incident resulted in a Philippine Navy sailor having his thumb severed, while several other naval personnel sustained minor injuries. The DFA calls out China for its actions, stressing the Philippines' efforts to rebuild a conducive environment for dialogue and consultation in the South China Sea. In a statement, the DFA says China's words do not match their actions on the West Philippine Sea. The agency adds they expect China to act responsibly and refrain from doing actions that put the safety of Filipinos at risk. The DFA reiterates its call for China to adhere to international law, especially the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea and the 2016 Arbitral Award. The DFA demands for respect to the Philippine sovereignty, sovereign rights, and jurisdiction of the country. Apart from the ramming incident, it was also reported that the China Coast Guard used water cannons and even boarded Philippine vessels. The camp of suspended Bamban Tarlac Mayor Alice Go may file counter charges against persons who publicized legal documents about her, according to her legal counsel. In an interview, Go's lawyer, attorney Stephen David, cites how lawmakers immediately made public several of Go's documents, including her statement of assets and liabilities and net worth and her birth certificate. David notes that these actions constitute violations of the Data Privacy Act, which protects the privacy of individuals while ensuring free flow of information to promote innovation and growth. David urges lawmakers to instead take allegations against the mayor to the court. According to David, Go's camp may file counter-charges if her rights as a private individual will continue to be trampled on. When asked who they would file the counter-charges against, David says that he will defer the decision to his client, Go. On June 18, Go's camp asserted her innocence directly to Executive Secretary Lucas Bersamin and denied all allegations hurled against her. According to Go in her letter, all allegations against her were baseless and were mere conspiracy theories. These are the stories you need to know today. I'm Neil Mercado. Follow INQUIRER.net on Facebook, X, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and Reddit. For more stories, visit INQUIRER.net. Good evening.